And anytime we launch a new development, there will be a press release going out describing, it's going to be so many thousand square feet and it's 120 units and, 30 of them are low income or, whatever the breakdown is. And the reality is that when we announce a project like that, then it's going to take what, like a couple of years or a few years or something to come. So you'd be getting, a 2 or 3 year head start on knowing where and when something was going to pop up.
Can I just ask one question? I don't mean to take you off.
Yeah.
I actually have one of your lotteries on 128th Street. I don't know if this was one of your buildings or whatever, but I have a lot of friends. I was actually trying to get them hooked on this lottery things. I've been doing this for about a year. Just like you said, you can do a lot of them. I know I did a lot of them. I didn't have to pay anything. I did it. But my question was this: if you have, it's very difficult sometimes. I guess the process to actually get picked once you get picked or whatever, you have to go through a whole bunch of things. So like if you don't, first of all, do you have to have credit? Do you have to have like a credit card if you don't have credit? Are you out of it? Like if you just have a job and no credit, no actual credit cards or loans or anything like that, does that mean that you can't get it?
They do require some credit of some sort. Different ones will have different, levels of it, but generally there is a credit requirement.
Credit requirement, like just having a credit account, right? It doesn't have credit.
Yeah, they do.
He has to have a good credit, that's all. He has to have good credit. If he has no credit, that's good. I mean, that's better than bad credit.
Right.
Okay?
Right, the problem is bad credit. I mean, if you have no credit card and no home loan, then your credit has been unaffected in a good way or a bad way. It should just be middle of the road. Yeah, and that would be fine. But if you've had, a credit delinquency in the past, recent time that's lowered your credit score, then that's going to be a problem for you. But lack of credit shouldn't be a problem.
If I could just make a quick observation, because I think we're moving into questions, but I think there's something that really disturbs me, and it's more of a theoretical point. I think most of the folks here are looking for practical information about housing and how they can improve their own situation, and that's really what it should be about. But I think there's something that should be pointed out, and again and again and again, because you come in with a map of distressed properties that are having real difficulties. The foreclosure map that was referred to earlier, same areas. If you look at OLA, because I used to work for HPD and code enforcement years ago, if you looked at the concentration of violations, it was the same areas. And it's one thing that really annoys me very deeply. It's not from you folks at all, not from you. I think this is, government and the private sector trying to do what it does. But if there is any assumption that for some reason these foreclosure conditions, these distressed properties, are somehow a reflection of the population and their attitudes in those communities, it's infuriating. And the reason why it's infuriating is because if you go back in the 1930s, we were building hundreds of thousands of public housing units, and throughout the 1950s, in the 1950s, we had 37% union jobs where people were making a living wage, much larger section. We had higher levels of minimum wage, relatively speaking. The shelter allowance for people who are on public assistance is now a fraction of its former value. It has not kept up. Government has clearly been pressed. But the consequence to the people in these communities and elsewhere, but in a greater concentrations in these communities, is that their incomes have fallen for 3 decades. They cannot sustain what it takes to maintain this housing. So the job that you're doing, important and vital as it is going to have to be repeated and repeated and repeated again. If there is some sense in the city government that we can just go in and kind of jumpstart these things and give folks decent housing and everything's going to be fine without addressing the underlying decline of incomes and unemployment issues, it's an illusion. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do what you're doing. You should do what you're doing. We should have more public housing. We should have Mitchell-Lama back. We should have more subsidies. We should have all of that stuff until folks can get decent living wage jobs. And I know that's way beyond your purview here. I know that's way beyond what we're talking about here. But it's so easy to lose sight of the real underlying fundamental problem. We have to stay with it, that if people had living wage jobs, if they had opportunities, we would not have these housing affordability problems. Thank you.
I'm going to ask you if you have a little patience with me because I've listened to all of this and the politicians have left, because I wanted to really ask them some questions. I believe much of what has happened to us in Harlem in terms of pushing out this population has been incurred and encouraged by some of our politicians. But, you know, like tonight, they leave, so you don't get an opportunity to make them have to face the music. One of the things I wanted to talk about is that we need a clear definition. This has been brought up to the two politicians who were here tonight before. The community has to be educated as to what affordable housing is, what the definition is, versus income-targeted housing. When developers come to the community board, they talk about affordable. You have many of the politicians, including our borough president, who talks about affordable. But he's not telling you what the definition of affordable is. So what happens is people think it's affordable in terms of what they're making in their community. If the community is $30,000 a year, the housing that's coming in is for people who are making $30,000 a year. That's not what's happening. What's coming in is housing for people who are making $60,000, $70,000 a year, based on the definition, which is not definition of what they're making in that community, but definition of out in Yonkers and Westchester and all downtown, all of this. So what happens is, frankly, they're really probably getting the cheaper housing because we're helping to bring those numbers down, but we are getting jacked up. And I don't know about any of the other developers. I know that L&M has benefited from it, particularly from the PS 90 building, which they could meet with the politician, but the community couldn't. See, about what happened with PS 90. And they're walking around talking about, and that's L&M walking around and talking about they got awards for it, but they would have gotten an award for PS 90 if it had become a nursing home and a high school that we needed, and not high-end condominiums with a few sprinkling of these so-called affordable apartments or condominiums that were put in. So we have to get smarter about what's happening. We got to learn these definitions, and we got to show up at those community board meetings and make our opinions known. It cannot be one person from the community. I'm tired of getting my tail whipped in there. I need people to show up once a month, whether they live in 9, 10, or 11, and let them know and follow through on it and develop youth leadership. Because we cannot have people around for 30 and 40 years letting this happen. And they rolling around in $3,000 suits, and we getting put out of our apartments. That's our fault. So, you know, we got to deal with some reality about what we are allowing to happen around us, as well as what some of the people who are supposed to be protecting us and looking out for us. And we've given this opportunity and honor to do so. And they're not taking care of business. And we just keep re-electing them and letting them let this happen to us over and over again. And I just have one other thing to say, because I don't want to take over, you know, the conversation. I know there's other folks who want to speak. HPD. A lot of critics have come out of HPD and bought up housing in Harlem, and I'm sure they've done it out in Brooklyn and elsewhere, and rehabbed it because they almost had like an inside tip on what houses were being distressed and what. My feeling is this, and I know you want to be a fair guy, Mr. Dunn, to go to, and I'd be more than happy to go with the city council and make it impossible for at least 5 years or more for anybody who leaves HPD to become a developer and start eating up property all over the place and jacking up this community. And I'm sure, again, like I said, this is happening out in Brooklyn and Queens and whatnot. I'm only speaking about the village of Harlem because I'm born and raised here. This is, you know, I know what's happening here. But I know this kind of stuff has happened elsewhere, and it's a lot of your employees coming out of there that are doing this kind of stuff to us. And I really think that is like in government where they had to pass a law, I think, about lobbyists.
Oh, yeah.
Where, you know, the folks came out and had the inside track on this and that. The same kind of thing with HPD employees. And I don't know what we can ever get back that they've taken from us. in our communities, historic buildings. And they don't understand what it means to us because they're not invested in this community. It's all about the money. And just one last thing, and I'm gonna sit down. Just patience, please. This business with all these empty condos. Now we have developers here. Picture the homeless has had a campaign in terms of housing in all of these buildings with all of these apartments and condos. Why can't we be real? Why are we keeping these people in shelters when we have all these apartments here empty? They have to be down here with their kids. You got people being put out of public housing because of the economy as he's speaking about. They're being made homeless to bring people into public housing. Where's the mayor on this? Now he just figured out that young black men and Latino men have been having all these problems all this year, and it's been affecting our community because our men can't even get work. A lot of times on the building that's being rehabbed right in their community, Mr. Diamond. I pass these buildings and they're being worked on. I don't see any of my community in there.
Right. I'm going to answer that. You know why? It's our fault. We don't get together.
This is what I'm saying.
I'm going to tell you, I come from the financial services industry. I did not, what I knew there was that I was going to move to Harlem because I need to get an affordable apartment, and I'm a workaholic. I'm working until midnight. Until I was personally affected, did I get involved. And that involvement included the fact that my landlord, my lovely landlord, did not have a super for 2 years, and my biggest complaint was trash in the lobby. But I went in this community and I sought help. No one wanted to help me. So what I did was I said, you know what, screw you. I created a tenant association, went online, just looked it up. I came back the day after I was affected, which by the way, was that some insect bit my cat. Man, that's some serious stuff when you don't have any kids. So I came back and I organized the building. And I said, you know what? I'm gonna go find every one of his buildings, which I did. And the people that you see here, the Palante, these are the grassroots. They're here supporting our organization who, after becoming a tenant association, who was the first tenant, who put together the first tenant-initiated transfer of the 7A program, which is one of the preservation programs. We cost that landlord $6 million, but we did it together. In Harlem, it's not about the elected officials. It's not about the landlords. It's about the community. I'm so happy to hear that you go to community board meetings, because you know what? The community, the faces in the community boards are changing. They're changing. There are people just moving in. Why is it that the people moving in, coming to the community board meetings, setting time aside to do that, and yet we're sitting down? The same question. Why is it there's a party downstairs and nobody's up here? So before we point fingers, let's start looking at our buildings. Let's start looking about what we can do to impact change. The reason this thing that Palante got going on is called a roadshow. We're going through the community saying, here's what's happening. You're hearing from these folks coming in from work just like we are. It's not about low income. It's not about for affordable apartments for those who can afford it. I know that lingo too. But there are resources. Seth said, if you go online, you're gonna find lottery. You know what I do? I go online. In fact, our website has a link to those affordable apartments. And our volunteer goes every week and pulls down the application, and we have a mailing list of people who are looking for apartments. Does this meet the criteria? Yes. We send them the application. We put the envelope, put their address, HPD sends them the application. Now, my biggest question, though, Seth, and I'm sorry, I'm going to put you in front of a moving train here. That's wonderful about all this preservation. What about the homeless? These folks right now, the folks in the homeless shelter are sitting there like deer in hold on one second, in lights. As we know, the Advantage program was removed. Section 8 is gone. There are these homeless shelters, and I personally represent a few of those residents, from seniors, families, and what happens in the homeless shelter is an abuse to humankind. Does HPD have any plans with all of these buildings, can we, is there a program that they can enroll in? Because clearly it can't include credit, because if you're in a homeless shelter, it's probably not because you want a 3-bedroom apartment, because they don't exist, because we have to go build more, Ken. But the truth is, what can we do? Are the homeless folks are in shelters. And when I mean homeless, I'm talking about families. I'm talking about senior citizens like Mr. Ali, that's 80 years old and he's homeless. What does the city, does HPD provide? Is there anything out there for us to tap into?
Unfortunately for HPD, very little. We do have a tangential, well, not so much tangential role, but of course, there is a whole city agency that deals with homelessness, the Department of Homeless Services. One of my
And
oh, that's very true.
And who?
But
OMH, Office of Mental Health.
Oh, yes.
They've been doing some developments too.
but HPD does do a little bit of.
The Office of Mental Health, OMH. We're working on a project right now with them for 60 units of chronically homeless individuals in the Bronx.
Why not across the street from the mayor? We're all not, having these buildings put everywhere. That's my other problem. No one, it's just one or two communities that have to feel quote unquote the pain. And I'm not knocking the mentally retarded and all I'm saying is, it seems as though certain types of buildings with certain types of folk show up in certain types of neighborhoods, but they don't show up on the Upper East Side. And they don't show up on certain areas in Upper West Side. But they show up in Ireland. So I'm just trying to figure out how are the decisions made downtown as to where these buildings are supposed to go. How come they're not going up everywhere, across from Amanda Burns? She can use it.
But I think I certainly can't speak to the entire answer, undoubtedly there is a bit of what Alcia was talking about. Neighborhoods where people are very organized, they come out and they say, "Not in my backyard." In neighborhoods where people aren't very organized, they don't come out to say, "Not in my backyard," and they get stuff in their backyard. But that's undoubtedly that's true of everything in the type of government that we have in America. But another factor in this, and it's just an unfortunate reality, is after the housing decline in the 70s and the 80s, HPD the city had taken through tax foreclosure